Hi, this is my review of So You Wanna Be a Badass. This role-playing game is somewhat difficult to define because it's probably one of the most original role-playing games that I have reviewed in a while. It's a semi-universal system, and I will say that because there are many elements integrated into the gameplay that it makes it stand out despite the theme, the setting, the world that you have chosen to play this role-playing game. Mostly because of a couple of things. First, you have the element of being a badass, actually being rewarded by doing things with style and facing adversity with great gusto, with class. And you also have the social combat element. This is unlike other role-playing games where you use it to perhaps try to convince someone, engage someone in a debate or conversation, trying to sway the crowd for a particular purpose or cause. But here, social combat is quite deadly. You can use some social attacks during your typical combat encounter, where you usually use magic and physical attacks, and you can actually disable your opponent. You can actually make your opponent flee from the battlefield. And because of that, it almost feels like this game is the result of combining a science fantasy RPG framework with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, that you know, that anime and manga, and Final Fantasy. There are some elements concerning Final Fantasy, and with The Dying Earth as well, because in The Dying Earth, for those of you that haven't read the novels, sometimes words can be quite deadly. It could cause the demise of different characters. So here you have a system that encourages you to be a badass and to use wordplay during combat, during physical and magical combat. In that sense, I think it also reminds me a bit of Monkey Island, the computer game, where you are fighting against pirates and you actually win the combat by making some smart comments or one-liners and retorts and comebacks. So this role-playing game is many things. Now let's start talking about the quality of the PDF. The quality is pretty good. I did find a few typos throughout the book, although there weren't too many typos. And when it comes to the art, I like the style that it's sort of like an action comedy type of illustration. It feels like they combined Western comic book, like for example that comic book that appears in the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game core book from 5th and 6th edition. It feels like they combined that minimalistic style with manga aesthetics. But I think some of the lines could have been better defined. And the entire art is in black and white. You will see most of the art when I talk about the outlooks that are basically character classes, sort of, in this role-playing game. They're more like archetypes, and they are quite customizable. It would be incorrect to think of them just as character classes because the customization is quite great. There is a lot of potential to reshape these outlooks to play the type of character that you want. And the entire rules, they are well explained and written, and the organization isn't too bad. However, I think it's due to the fact that there are some new concepts to understand when it comes to social combat and being a badass that you can get a bit lost if you aren't careful. The book assists you in understanding everything by having an introductory page with each chapter or section explaining key terms. So that assists you in understanding this rule set. However, I do recommend that when you see a concept that you are not familiar with, that you perhaps make a small note or just pay attention to it or be aware of it, because most of the explanation concerning that key concept is going to be covered a bit later on. I think that could also be considered a small negative. Maybe some of the key concepts are too spread out throughout the pages, but it's not going to be a major obstacle in understanding the content of this role-playing game system. So overall the quality is pretty good. However, you do not have bookmarks or hyperlinks. However, the minimalistic style will allow you to get to where you want to go when you navigate the entire PDF. And because of that, it's also going to be quite printer friendly. You won't spend too much ink if you decide to print this document. I think another improvement when it comes to explanation of the rules would be to highlight with a different font and perhaps some page references. Maybe they are talking about advantage or meter. Maybe they could say see page 20 something for more information. That could also improve the entire document, in my opinion. And at the very start of the book, you also have a quick game setup page. And this is excellent because they tell you the page number on how to create a character quickly. That is, what is an outlook, information related to hit points, ego. It takes you to the page that you are looking for. And you also have sections that cover the most important rules. Maybe you want to learn more about interrupts and reactions or mirror-based actions. You have the page right here. But this would be much better if it was hyperlinked. So you could click on the page, and if the document was bookmarked, you could also get to this quick game setup section quite quickly. Otherwise, you will have to memorize the page, that is page 4, and you will have to type 4 and enter to get to this section. So if you're going to use this as a PDF, that could be slightly bothersome. So the quality in general is pretty decent. Now let's talk about the contents. First, you have some definitions and an introduction to the game in general, telling you what is a badass, how to use the book, how to read it, what you need to play. This is a game that is played with 12-sided dice. You also have information on how to be the type of hero for the system of So You Wanna Be a Badass. They go quite into detail when it comes to the definition or the attitudes and style of a badass. So for example, a badass is someone who faces adversity, even at a disadvantage. A badass is someone who takes actions that are quite noteworthy, uncommon, perhaps quite flashy. And a badass is also a person that rises over adversity with style and doing exciting things. So you have to keep these things in mind because in this game, as you carry out different actions, be it attacks or even skill checks, you will get points for your badass meter. And you can do different things with this badass meter. Consider it currency that you can use in special actions. I really like it how you can obtain these badass points both outside and inside of combat, because in combat being a badass is a bit more common. You could do some amazing attacks, well, perhaps reciting some one-liners, moving about the battlefield in a very sleek or smooth way, things like that. But maybe outside of combat you need to do some research. You need to find some very difficult to obtain information. You need to go into this ancient library. And along the way, you bump into this librarian or perhaps scholar or whatever. And you talk to her about your quest. You flirt with her a little. And then she offers to help you for the entire day looking for that information. So that's pretty badass. Now you have a very knowledgeable individual that can assist you in something that could have been quite difficult otherwise, and you gain a point of badass meter because of that. So how can you spend these badass points? Depending on the action that you want to take, some actions are a bit more expensive, some others are quite affordable. So for example, if you want to reroll a single die roll that you or an ally just made, that only costs 1 point of badass meter. But if you want to take a second action or attack, that will cost 3 points. So it all depends on what you want to do. Maybe you want to move more distance than usual and make a single attack, or maybe you want to carry out a last stand, or maybe you want to have a flashback. It all depends, and each one of these special actions costs a number of badass points. You have information on making a hero, hit points, ego, and outlook. Now I will take a look at each of the outlooks later on in this review, but suffice to say, an outlook, as I said, is somewhat like a character class. However, there is a great customization. When it comes to the ways that you can level up your character, you have this little graphic displaying all the different outlooks. And as you can see, some outlooks are farther away in steps from others. And for example, let's say that you want to level up as a marksman. All of your marksman abilities are going to be quite easy to obtain as you level up. But what if you wanted to add the abilities of a trickster or a striker? Well, because as you can see in this graphic, they are one step away. You would only be able to add abilities from those outlooks at a lower level. But what if you wanted to be a marksman dancer or a marksman caster? You can see that dancer and caster is 2 steps away from marksman. So you could only take abilities from dancer or caster that were 2 levels below your marksman level. And so forth it goes. You have information, as I said, on important details such as hit points for your characters, but also ego. Now, ego really makes So You Wanna Be a Badass stand out from other role-playing games, or rather role-playing game systems, because ego is another way in which your enemies can take you down, or you can affect your enemies as well, possibly defeating them through social combat. And this is where the game gets somewhat surreal and quite on the anime and manga side of things. Maybe you have seen anime or manga where one of the characters is basically like carrying out some sort of word-based attack, like saying disturbing things or intimidating the opponent, or maybe revealing some uncomfortable details about the character's particular mission, anything imaginable. And in a very dramatic way, the character is going to be like, no, that can't be, that's impossible. And he's going to break down, perhaps to fall to his knees. I remember this anime, Knights of the Zodiac, where there are characters that almost completely annihilate the main characters just because they start tricking them and getting them out of mental balance, so to speak, by saying, oh, if you kill me, I actually place this magical effect on your friend, and if you kill me, he's going to die too, and just break them down like that, and actually almost managing to defeat them. So I think in that sense, the ego element in So You Wanna Be a Badass makes it stand apart from other role-playing games, because by inflicting enough social damage, you could immobilize, paralyze, or make the enemy useless in combat. They break down, and if you inflict even more social damage, they will flee the battlefield. Now, let me take advantage of this moment to talk about why I consider So You Wanna Be a Badass a semi-universal role-playing game system. This system can be used with any theme, setting, as I said, but when it comes to ego, I wouldn't remove it. That is, the social attack, I wouldn't consider it a good thing to remove it from a particular setting or way in which you are playing this RPG, because it adds strategic and tactical considerations. Let's say you are pinned down, maybe you are behind some cover, and the enemy is firing at you using arrows or bullets or whatever, and you could still inflict some social damage. Maybe you start saying some nasty things about your attackers from behind cover, or revealing some disturbing truths. It could be anything. We will talk a bit more about that when I get into combat in this system. But for example, if you wanted to reskin this, because you could play this as a fantasy medieval type of game, or a science fiction game, or science fantasy game, anything you can think of. So maybe you want to play this sort of Lovecraftian game. Maybe the social attacks that damage the enemy's ego, maybe they're actually things that a man was not supposed to know, or things related to the old ones, eldritch secrets, and this is actually what breaks the sanity of your enemies apart. Maybe in that case you could reskin the ego mechanic as sanity. But what if you're playing, let's say, a science fiction setting, or science fantasy perhaps, where there are a lot of powerful psychic attacks? So you could have something apart from magic, and the psychic attacks could be represented by social combat. Maybe all of those words and mind games that you are playing with your opponents, they are actually some sort of psionic suggestion, some sort of hypnosis, or maybe it's a direct mental attack that shatters your enemy's awareness or perception of things. You could handle it in many different ways. A couple of other important things to mention concerning the system is that hit points are not easy to get back or replenish or regenerate. Only a few abilities can heal you from the wounds that you take during combat, and ego damage as well, it's also not easy to recover. You will need to use some specific abilities, or arrive at some, for example, clinics or medical centers, or perhaps resting in a particular town. It depends on how you want to handle things. Maybe if it's a sci-fi setting, you have like these bats or chambers where the characters are treated using different substances. So you can handle it any way that you like, but once you go into an adventure, you need to take care of your ego and your hit points, because you never know when you are going to be able to replenish those lost hit points and ego. And when it comes to being a badass and getting that that badass meter replenished, it's all about acting as a badass, but the game master and the other players need to approve of your badassery. So if you are overdoing it just for the sake to get meter points, it's not going to work out. You need to do something that will get everyone at the table going ooh and ah, and that's amazing, that's so badass and such. It's also noteworthy that in this game you do not gain experience points. You level up as you reach certain milestones or fulfill different objectives or reach your goals. As you level up, you'll have more abilities to use. You have abilities such as, for example, actions, which is something that it's quite straightforward. You just do something. Maybe you use a particular outlook related power or ability. But you also have interrupts. These are things that only activate during certain conditions. You also have passives that are always on effect. But you also have talents. And talents, they help you out in all sorts of situations outside of combat. There could be some combat specific occasions when you actually get to use them, but they're mostly related to talents in more utility based type of situations. Because for example, you have information talents such as intuition, knowledge, logic, and divination. You have social talents such as banter, deception, negotiation, and theatrics. You also have physical talents such as agility, endurance, precision, strength. And these physical talents, although they have an effect in your combat performance, like for example, agility makes you a lot more effective when dodging. Endurance allows you to take more damage. That is, damage is reduced by your endurance. When it comes to precision, this actually bolsters or improves your accuracy in ranged attacks, and strength has an impact on your melee attacks. But you could also use these talents in other situations. Strength to lift heavy objects, agility when you are moving perhaps through a rickety bridge, trying not to fall down, or maybe you're walking over a ledge, and similar situations related to these physical talents. In this story chapter, it's all about telling you how to run a specific game, following a narration, describing basic details around the players, the actions and resolutions, how to handle them, how the players make choices. You also have role-playing tips, and how sessions should be about reacting to the changes in the game world. You also have information how to use, for example, a map and the setting in general where you want to play the game, because I think this is a good game to be played with a grid. You could also play it as a theater of the mind type of experience, but because of positioning and the exciting pace of combat, because this combat happens in a single second, each combat turn happens in a single second, so using a grid would be quite useful in my opinion. There are also many abilities and powers that have to do with spacing, so I would definitely recommend using a grid. You also have some good tips on how to use abilities and talents, and how to be a badass to get that badass meter up. The next chapter talks about combat, what causes a fight, how to initiate combat, and how to start combat either with magic and physical attacks, or social combat, or both at the same time. This is going to be quite frequent, because social combat is another strategic element in battle, where either physical or magical attacks are not exactly working. There are some enemies that are more vulnerable to social combat, and that's why I recommend that you do not remove social combat despite or regardless of the setting or the world that you decided to use to play So You Wanna Be a Badass RPG. Because social combat is another way in which you can attack your enemies, and you will also have to defend against social combat. And when it comes to the customization in battle, that is talking about a theme and setting, this book contains stats for different weapons, not only let's say medieval fantasy weapons, but also rifles, pistols. So you would only need to modify the aesthetic trappings so that it adapts to a particular type of game world. Maybe you want to play something like Final Fantasy, the more modern ones, where you actually use guns and rifles and different types of energy weapons and such, then you would count those firearms as those types of science fantasy weapons, because sometimes you have some weird energy based weapons. But what if you want to play something on the early Renaissance or late Renaissance period? Then you could count on these firearms statistics to represent perhaps black powder weapons. So it's quite universal in the way in which you can apply combat related elements to different systems and worlds and historical or pseudo-historical periods. But the social combat and the badass element, I think, regardless of whether you choose a particular game world or setting, it's always going to feel like a very over-the-top action comedy type of experience. When it comes to social combat, it's quite usual to engage into it when you are having a physical confrontation. So in this chapter you have all the information needed to engage in both physical and social combat at the same time. And physical combat is also going to include magical attacks. You also have information on line of sight. But before we get into further details, let's talk about each turn. Each turn in So You Wanna Be a Badass represents a single second. So each turn in this RPG system is quite action-packed. It happens so fast. Everything happens at the same time in a single second. So each combat turn, you could use a talent, or you could charge an action, or move one space in any direction. And this is not counting interrupts, and I will talk about those in a bit. But when it comes to charging actions, which I think are quite interesting, it's basically that some special attacks and abilities and maneuvers, they have a number of turns that you have to charge them before using them. They are very powerful, very potentially devastating abilities, but the more powerful that they are, the longer they take to charge. So sometimes you want to carry out a very powerful attack, you need to charge it for, let's say, 2 or 3 turns. And this reminds me of a particular anime, if I remember correctly, it's called World Break, in which the characters are kind of like magicians and they are writing and chanting spells while they are fighting. It looks somewhat absurd at times that they are running and jumping and parrying and blocking, and they are still chanting very long spells and writing like sigils in the air until they manage to complete the spell and they release it or unleash it on their enemies. So it reminds me of that type of fantasy combat. And of course, because everything happens at the same time, you have some guidelines as to how to handle things so that they do not become too confusing. For example, you give priority to any non-movement actions that require no rolls, and then any movement actions, and followed by any non-attack actions requiring a roll, and you get those guidelines and more specific things like what happens when 2 creatures move into the same space. You basically decide via a contested roll. In this game, everything is handled via opposed rolls. You also have information on what happens when 2 creatures are attacking different targets, 2 creatures attacking each other. Now, when it comes to defense or dodging, it's very important to consider it each turn, because if you decide not to protect yourself and just carry out attacks, you're basically not going to react to the way the enemy is attacking you. So you have to take that in mind to think if it's worth it to sacrifice an action or spend it in dodging or protecting yourself against either social attacks or physical attacks, including magic attacks, or if you would rather attack a specific enemy with a powerful ability, perhaps one that you have been charging, to take care of that threat. The good thing is that when you choose to defend yourself, you can defend against any number of attacks. And it is during this exchange of blows or attacks where interrupt actions come into play. For example, you could consider blocking and dodging a type of interrupt action. Attacks are resolved in the following way. Each participant rolls a 12-sided die, you add the appropriate modifiers, and the highest roll between the 2 combatants wins. And there is a difference if you decided to either block or dodge. If you dodge, you avoid getting hit, but if you succeed by 5 or more, you may actually counterattack by either dealing ego damage or gaining one stock of your badass meter. So maybe you dodged that enemy's attack and you made fun of his attack or intimidated him as if that's all you've got and something like that. But if you decided to block, the attack automatically hits, but your endurance is treated as being 3 higher. Endurance is basically your damage reduction. Now, blocking and dodging is pretty standard when it comes to reactions that you can take in combat, but there are other effects or other interrupts that are more advanced, and you actually need to wait for them to recover. So maybe you use an interrupt that needs 2 turns before you can use it again. You have to wait those turns, it's mandatory. When compared to normal types of attacks, social combat is a bit more devastating and lethal, or potentially so at least, because for example, when you try to defend against social attacks, the highest roll wins, but regardless of whether you are the attacker or the defender, you deal the difference in the roll to your opponent if you win. So you can deal a lot of ego damage. And you also have an advantage in a sort of rock, paper, scissors type of way, in which, for example, if you decide to use banter to beat negotiation, or negotiation to beat deception, or deception to beat banter, the damage inflicted to your opponent is doubled. If you decide to use theatrics in social combat, it works in a different way. If you win while using theatrics, while defending, then you steal the advantage from the target. This would mean that if they decide to declare a social attack during the next second or turn, they will take a d12 of ego damage. They need to use an ability to regain the advantage. So advantage in social combat is another thing that you need to keep track of. And if you have an audience watching your arguments or debates, if you get 10 points of social advantage, you are declared the winner. Another important thing when it comes to any type of action is that this system uses exploding dice. That is, if you roll the maximum amount in a 12-sided die, you roll a 12, you get to roll again. So you can really get some over-the-top results. I think the way theatrics is handled differently in social combat is a really good way to stop your opponent from abusing using social combat or social attacks, because theatrics only work in this way in which you steal the advantage if you defend against a social attack. So that way the opponent could always have that risk that if he decides to attack you with social combat, you could defend using theatrics and you could set him up like for a trap later on when he tries to attempt social attack again. You also have more details on how to, for example, use 2 weapons, information on how to use universal actions such as moving, crouching, laying prone. You could search your inventory. It's a lot easier to, for example, pull out something from your belt rather than your backpack. So all of this could affect battle. Different combat positions such as crouching or laying prone could give you a bonus or even a penalty against certain attacks. You also have information on different types of weapons, swords, hammers, even instruments that are magically enchanted and deal sound-based damage. You also have dark arts, these are magic attacks, information on guns, bows, the time that you have to wait before using a specific weapon again. You also have information on the range of weapons, the level, that is the level you will need to be at to acquire a particular weapon. You also have more details on charging attacks and some properties of weapons, because for example, you have a bastard type of weapon, let's say bastard sword. It can be used one-handed or equipped in both hands for extra damage. Maybe you have a weapon with the pierce property, so you can ignore half of the target's endurance. This is great for those heavily armored opponents. There are some weapons that are actually unblockable. They cannot be interrupted or responded to, quite devastating. But of course, because of that, they need a long time to charge. So you better take care of that enemy before he unleashes that attack that you cannot block. Perhaps you could use some of your outlook abilities to make sure that charge never reaches fully charged. You have a really good selection of weapons and attacks, and this is not even counting the abilities of the outlooks, and we'll talk about those later on. So here you have different types of kicks, punching, using daggers, short swords, batons, zweihanders. You could use a nodachi, a battle axe, a lance. You also have ranged weapons such as pistols, revolvers. You even have social types of attacks like rude gestures, accusations, instruments, as I was telling you, like trumpet. You also have spells such as flames, engulf, shock, two-handed range weapons, such as the crossbow, the longbow, the rifle, the shotgun. You have some unusual weapons, as like for example baseball bats, cleavers, battering rams, many insults as well, like glaring, making a witty quip, cutting remark, and they have different ranges. They need a particular time to be used, that is recharging it. They have different properties. Some of them could actually stun your opponent, and some attacks and magical effects could also inflict some status damage on your opponent, some negative status effects. Maybe your opponent ends up blinded or muted or poisoned or shocked, and all of these inflicts different sorts of things that you would expect. Like for example, if your opponent is shocked, he drops whatever he is holding. If he's poisoned, he takes a certain number of damage points each time he acts until cured, and so forth. I think the combat system of So You Wanna Be a Badass is a very unique and exciting take, but I do think that the game master needs to apply some sound judgment. There could be some unexpected effects, so I would definitely recommend that you go with the flow of battle and try to make sense of those difficult to resolve situations in which some things could happen at the same time or one thing after the other. Despite the simultaneous nature of combat, there could be some situations related to different outlook abilities and powers that could be somewhat confusing to resolve, so I would recommend that the game master applies some common sense so that things manage to click together. Something that I also like is how weather and the environment, the battlefield, also plays a crucial part in battles. Because for example, weather, depending on how hot it is or cold, it could deal damage. If it's too hot, it could deal between 1 to 5 points of damage. It depends on the intensity. There's also the effects of, for example, wind. It could knock your character towards a certain space if that character is not strong enough. Or maybe there's fog, it impairs your normal vision. And there's also the elements to consider. This could also be parts of different special attacks or spells, like for example, fire sets your enemies ablaze, cold inflicts the frozen condition. You could also throw your opponents against a wall and it will deal damage. So all of those are important considerations in battle. Now let's go deeper into outlooks. So outlooks are basically a way in which your hero approaches any sort of adventure. Maybe he wants to be quite strong, or maybe your abilities can be changed at will. You're quite versatile. Maybe you're actually quite defensive. You do not deal as much damage as other archetypes, but you can take a beating. Or maybe you're really good with ego related abilities and you have some support special powers as well. Each outlook also has an ultimate action. It's quite expensive in terms of meter points. When you manage to pull it off, this is the ultimate badass move. You also have some unique abilities depending on the outlooks. And now I will give you a brief overview of each of the outlooks. First, we have the Berserker. It's not very good at taking ego damage, but this outlook has high hit points. It's mostly focused on dealing damage, but you can also take quite a lot of damage yourself. So this is basically a very violent outlook. You get really angry, really mad, and you transfer that anger, you transform it into damage, of course. The unique ability of the Berserker is Unstoppable. They increase their endurance by a lot while making attacks. So this allows you to be more defensive while you are dealing all of that damage through your abilities and powers. The Berserker usually favors hammers and spears, and you even have some recommended builds because, as I said, all of these outlooks are quite customizable. Each outlook has several abilities and powers that you can choose from, but you can also choose abilities from other outlooks, like I said at the beginning of this review. Now there could be a confusion between ultimate attacks and unique abilities. Unique abilities are basically activated when a particular condition is met. Like the Berserker's unique ability, it activates when you have a certain amount of hit points, like an emergency reaction or response. But when it comes to ultimate attacks, like I said, they cost meter points. Now I'm going to read different ultimate attacks and abilities and such. In the case of the Berserker, you have the heaven-piercing elbow drop. You basically rise into the sky a number of spaces and you deliver a devastating elbow drop. You also have a massive hit that inflicts hit points and ego damage. You have more abilities divided by level, and of course the higher the level, the more powerful the abilities are. So you have some actions such as Angry Screaming, which is an attack that cannot be dodged. And this is perfect to represent when a berserker, for example in fiction, anime and such, just starts hacking and cutting and thrusting so savagely that the opponent is barely able to escape the damage. You also have some things such as Guard Crush, pretty self-explanatory. You also have a Fury, you gain a bonus to your damage. You also have some other things like Bloodlust. So the next second after you make an attack, you can actually move additional spaces. And then you have Reckless Abandon. You move a number of spaces and then attack, and you gain a bonus to damage equal to the damage that you took while moving. So this is perfect. Remember that combat here happens each second. All of the actions are simultaneous. And so if you're getting attacked by several opponents, you could use this ability to deal even more damage. All of the different abilities are either interrupts or passive abilities or straightforward attacks that you make whenever you want each turn. At the highest level, the Berserker even has some powers that induces rage in everyone else, such as Everybody Riot. So all creatures on the stage gain the enraged condition or status. Then we have the Caster Outlook, which is quite low on hit points, but it can take a lot when it comes to ego damage. The unique ability of the caster is known as Spellbook. This allows them to discard an old spell and learn new spells at their level or below that. They usually employ dark arts and instruments as their weapons. Some of these Outlook's unique abilities are Overcharge, which allows you to basically cast as many spells as you like. And there's also End of an Era. I think this is one that is really cool. You basically draw a line to any wall and you start dealing damage to all creatures standing in that line or adjacent to that line, and they are also unable to act for a number of seconds. And of course, this Outlook has a lot of flexible spells and abilities when it comes to everything that this Outlook gets each level. You have things such as, for example, Double Up. Whenever you roll a d12, you roll 2 6-sided dice instead, and you can actually roll again if you roll 6. So this actually gives you the possibility of getting exploding damage, for example, in an attack. This is a passive ability. You also have some things such as Gravitate. You roll against the target's strength, and if you are successful, they are unable to jump, fly, or stand. So this is really useful for those hit and run, or rather hit and fly type of enemies. You also have other abilities such as, for example, the spell called Console, which allows you to heal ego and remove condition. You also have Ray. You create a projectile in an adjacent space, and then it starts moving on its own, following a certain pattern. You also have Spell Free Zone, which is that erasing all effects on the target or negating spells that target is casting. You also have Shout, which is an attack targeting several creatures within a number of spaces. You also have abilities to summon, the abilities to inflict crippling damage or conditions. You also have a Grand Illusion, playing with your enemy's mind, allowing them to see only what you want them to see. This could be quite useful even outside of combat, of course. And there's a really cool spell known as Apotheosis that allows you to roll 2d12 in each action or attack. That's quite devastating. Then we have the next Outlook, the Dancer. The Dancer is quite balanced when it comes to hit points and ego. It's a bit more sturdy when taking ego damage. And this is an artisan that is quite flexible. It's mostly a support type of Outlook. The unique ability is known as Gliding Step, which consists on moving about the battlefield as you dodge attacks. Each time you dodge, you can actually move one space. So this could give you a tactical advantage if you want to get closer to an enemy or get away from an enemy, or you want to get closer to an ally to offer support. When it comes to unique abilities, you have things such as Speed Blitz. You move a number of spaces determined by your level, and any enemy that you pass through while moving, it takes damage. You also have Final Number. All of your allies do one extra thing ignoring charge and recovery times, and you recover hit points for each ally that you have. Then let's talk about abilities per level. You have things such as counting on you. The target is able to use any action, ignoring charge time. You have riposte, negating an attack and attacking that creature. This is an interrupt ability. You also have things such as nimble. You and your adjacent allies may roll twice for agility and take whichever result you prefer. You have attacks such as Rhapsody of Red, which allows you to attack an enemy within a certain range, and if you succeed you can move a number of spaces away. You also have other attacks such as Swift Salsa. You move one space and attack an enemy in range, and each time you use this attack sequentially, you travel one extra space. So the Dancer Outlook is really useful to get to those perhaps enemies in the back that are quite fragile but are known as, for example, glass cannons that deal a lot of physical or even ego damage. The Dancer can reach them in time if you use the abilities correctly. You also have some other things such as Ballroom Blitz. You can teleport to any space and attack an enemy in range. You also have Curtain Call. Every time an enemy is defeated, you may use an ability ignoring its charge or recovery time. Then we have the Guardian. Now the Guardian is not very good at taking ego damage, but when it comes to taking hits that reduce his hit points, he's the best outlook. He is there to protect the other members of the team. His unique ability, Stone Wall, basically prevents enemies from moving through spaces that are adjacent to the Guardian. So they are able to occupy these spaces, but they cannot move beyond that. So the Guardian is perfect to create some sort of stopgap or bottleneck type of situations by himself. Some of his ultimate abilities are, for example, You Shall Not Pass. The Guardian draws a straight line anywhere on the stage, and for a number of seconds, enemies treat that line as a solid wall. Now this is something that I really like about So You Wanna Be a Badass. The different powers and abilities are described in a very straightforward, perhaps even dry way. So that way you can customize the different powers aesthetically, depending on the setting or the game that you want to play. So maybe your Guardian is part of a setting where there are Death Knights or something, these sort of like Dark Knights that wield necromantic powers. Maybe their You Shall Not Pass ability creates like a wall of bones. But maybe your Guardian is some sort of elemental fighter. So now he is able to create walls of earth or metal or ice to stop his enemies. Another ultimate ability is Indomitable Will. This makes the Guardian immune to all damage and effects for a number of seconds. Now when it comes to abilities by level, you have things such as Cover. You pull an adjacent creature into your space and you protect them. You also have Guard Plus. When you block any attacks this second, you do not suffer any additional effects and the damage can be reduced to 0. You also have other things such as Damage Sponge. Your hit points are increased by a number of points every level. This is a passive ability. You also have other things such as Alley Oop. You clash strength against an adjacent enemy, that is an opposed roll, and if you succeed, you inflict damage to the enemy and you throw that enemy towards an ally. So this is great for combination type of attacks. You also have Grand Hit. When using it, all adjacent creatures take damage and become stunned. You also have Bear Hug. This is pretty self-explanatory. You grab an enemy and you deal damage and they cannot move. They are trapped in your Bear Hug. You also have very powerful attacks such as Slam. So you deal devastating damage to all enemies around you and you knock them down. The next outlook is Marksman. This is a somewhat balanced outlook when it comes to the ego damage that it can take and hit points damage, and it's mostly focused on dealing damage from a distance. The unique ability is called Sharpshooter. You gain a bonus to ranged attack rolls for every space between the marksman and the target. Some ultimate abilities are autocorrect. You gain a pool of points that you can spend if your roll was somewhat low. You can increase the result of that roll by spending points. You also have Recon Sight. You are able to see where all creatures within 500 feet are. So this shows invisible creatures, creatures behind walls. This is a truly supernatural ability for the dedicated sniper. Now when it comes to powers per level, you have Acrobatic. which allows you to move a number of spaces through the air. So this is a very high jump or somersault. You also have bleeding shot, attacking an enemy, and if you succeed, they take ongoing bleed damage. You also have aloof. Any damage you deal this second is also dealt to the target's ego. Then you have death from above. Whenever you attack a target who is below you at all, you gain a number of points to your attack as bonus, and also to damage. You also have duck. Basically you crouch, potentially eliminating line of sight between you and your enemy, and this is great for ranged attacks. Because the enemy is no longer able to see you, you're completely safe. Then we have some abilities such as advancing fire. You attack an enemy in range, and if you succeed, you inflict damage and the nearest ally to the target can actually move a space. Then you have things such as trick shot. When you make an attack with a penalty, if you succeed, you deal a number related to that penalty in ego damage to all enemies within 3 spaces. You also have Missile Volley X, which allows you to make several attacks using ranged attacks. You also have I Swear I Moved. You can teleport to any space that you can see, but this effect isn't able to be used if anyone is directly watching you. You also have very powerful attacks such as Ricochet God. So this allows you to attack several creatures in quick succession as if your bullets are actually bouncing off walls. So if you wanted to play as a Revolver Ocelot type of character, this is the outlook for that. Then we have the Paragon. The Paragon is fairly sturdy, with a good amount of hit points and ego points. He could work as a sort of shield or damage sponge, but he is mostly focused on upholding oaths. Depending on the oaths that he faithfully follows, he gets certain bonuses and abilities. His unique ability is Open Your Heart. It allows the Paragon, with a touch, to see the greatest pride and greatest sorrow of a creature. This is great for ego-based attacks, so while for example the Guardian could be more focused on blocking attacks with weapons and spells, the Paragon is mostly focused on withstanding damage while identifying how to target the fragile ego of the enemy. This is great considering the paper, rock, scissors mechanic when it comes to ego or social attacks. Some of the ultimate abilities of the Paragon are Smite Enemy. All enemies will take double damage from you for a number of seconds. You also have Prayer for Absolution. You heal all allies to full hit points and ego, and you remove any statuses or detrimental effects from them. In my opinion, the Paragon is probably one of the more unique outlooks because of the different oaths in the powers per level. So for example, you have the Oath of Bless. The target gains a bonus to attack equal to your level for a number of seconds, and this oath is in effect when you decide to use it until you intentionally betray an ally. You also have the Curse Oath. The target suffers a penalty to attack rolls and dodge rolls equal to your level for a number of seconds. However, you lose this oath if you show mercy to an armed enemy. Now, all of these oaths are pretty easy to keep in the first level, but as they become more powerful, the oaths become more demanding. Because for example, you have Challenge. You roll Negotiation against the target's intuition. If you succeed, they will not do anything else until they have damaged you. And you lose this oath if you attack in a cowardly manner. So if an enemy is showing his back to you, you're going to lose this oath. There are other oaths such as Blazing Passion. Each second, creatures adjacent to you take a number of points in fire damage, and you are immune to fire damage. However, you must protect the chosen object of your passion at all costs. So the Game Master will surely try to find a way to get you into some challenging situations because of the object of your passion. You also have the Healer's Oath, that is Healer's Ward. The targets who you heal cannot take damage for 1 second, that's pretty good, but you lose this oath if you harm an unarmed creature. Then you have things such as the Black Hole Action. You choose a space and all creatures within a number of spaces of the target are forced to move as close as possible to that space. So that's great for crowd control. And the most powerful oaths are more specific in how you need to uphold them, because you have, for example, the Oath of Cloud of Shadow. The target within a number of spaces takes damage and keeps on taking damage for a number of minutes. So that's a lot considering this game is in terms of combat is played as each turn equals a second. But to uphold this oath, you cannot attack other creatures that are not the target of your oath. So this oath commits you to a specific enemy. And you also have the oath of Stygian Circle. You select a creature, you may teleport into a space adjacent to them and make a basic melee attack. However, you lose this oath if you defend someone you don't know. Then we have the Shifter outlook. The Shifter is more focused on taking damage. The ego is somewhat low, but hit points they are quite decent. The Shifter is basically a force of nature that is capable of changing or modifying his own body, the terrain of the battlefield, or weather itself. The unique ability is called Commune with Nature. It allows the Shifter to speak with any animals, and for the animals to speak back as if they shared a language. They can also communicate with plants. This is somewhat like a druid. Some of his ultimate abilities are Omega Mode, that can only be used when you are really wounded. You add your level as a bonus on all rolls and to damage, and you are able to teleport within a number of spaces instead of moving, and you can actually take an additional movement or attack each second. This lasts for a limited number of seconds. Then we have Acidic Storm. You target a space and all creatures within a radius from that space equal to a number proportional to your level. They take continuous damage unless they are cleansed somehow through water or some sort of cleansing effect. When it comes to abilities per level, you have many interesting and in-theme spells and actions such as Bug Transform. You roll Negotiation against the target's endurance, and if you succeed, they transform into an insect. They could be anything, an arachnid, an arthropod. You also have things such as Camouflage. You roll your deception against the intuition of all who have line of sight to you, and those who fail cannot see you until you move. You also have other things such as Waves Transform. The target is transformed into a small creature that lives in an aquatic environment, and their talents are unaffected. You also have Animal Instincts. You are able to see in the dark and identify creatures based on smell. You also have Dragon's Maw. Your mouth becomes like the mouth of a dragon, and you deal fire damage to all creatures in a straight line. You also have Crushing Strength. If you succeed on any attack, you are able to move your target one space in any direction. You also have Alpha Mode. When you have been severely wounded, you gain a bonus on all rolls. You deal double damage. You can teleport actually instead of moving. So as you can see, this outlook is great to have a sort of enraged druid sort of character. The next outlook is Striker. Pretty balanced when it comes to ego and hit points, but it's mostly a damage dealer. This character is somewhat of a duelist and a rogue. The unique ability is Flashing Blade. This attack makes you so fast that it takes priority over all of the other attacks on the battlefield, so you're always going to be the first one attacking. This could be vital in the combat turns of this game, because everything happens at the same time. You will be the only outlook that potentially kills the opponent before anything happens. When it comes to ultimate attacks, you have things such as Heaven's Destruction. For a number of minutes, instead of moving, you may teleport to a single space you see. You also have Dempsey Roll. You make a number of attacks equal to your level, and for every attack that hits, you gain a bonus to attack rolls and damage for 10 minutes. If all your attacks are against a single enemy, then they may not move for a number of seconds depending on your level. When it comes to abilities per level, you have Backflip. You negate an attack made against you and you move one space away. You also have Burning Heart. You attack an adjacent creature, and if you succeed, you inflict punch damage and also fire damage. You also have Disrupt. You roll your deception against an adjacent enemy's knowledge, and if you succeed, they are unable to attack this second. You also have things such as Antagonize, inflicting ego damage to a target equal to your level. You also have other things such as Axe Kick. You attack an adjacent enemy, and if you succeed, you inflict double damage with a kick, and the enemy is knocked down. You also have other things such as Afterimage. When you move during this second, you leave an illusionary double of you behind, and you are invisible while moving during this second. So that's really anime in my opinion. You also have Iaijutsu. You make an attack with a weapon drawn from your inventory. This is useful because you take a number of seconds if the item that you're looking for is quite tucked away. You also have Cancel EX. This is a passive ability. you spend a number of meter points to use another action or attack this second. You also have some very powerful moves, such as, for example, Advancing Guard. You are able to block attacks while you are making attacks. You can also move one space after blocking an attack. You also have very powerful attacks, such as Meteor Strike. You attack an adjacent enemy, and if you succeed, you inflict your weapon's damage and you move the target a number of spaces in any direction. You also have some very flashy and devastating things, and also again following that anime trend, which is a Fated Duel. You select a creature within a number of spaces and you move 3 spaces past them and then roll attack. If you succeed, you inflict triple damage. So this is kind of like those ninja that just run past an enemy and the enemy falls down dead because you slashed him so fast with your blade. The next outlook is the Tactician. This Tactician has a lot when it comes to taking ego damage, a lot of ego points, but he has low hit points. The Tactician works usually as a leader. He is commanding others and boosting their performances. He's mostly a support outlook. The unique ability of the Tactician is Delegating, and this is also quite useful even outside of combat. Delegating allows the Tactician to add points to a talent in an ally's role. They are even able to pass on any bonuses to that particular talent they have as well. So this effect can only be used once per role and can only affect a single ally at a time, but is nonetheless quite useful. Let's talk about some of the Tactician's ultimate abilities. You have All Out Attack. You select a number of enemies equal to your level and inflict the knockdown status, and all allies may move to a space where they can attack an enemy and make an attack of their choice. And if all enemies are inflicted with knockdown again, each ally may attack again. So this is perfect to gang up on an entire enemy force. You also have Paradigm Shift, probably the most complex of all the talents that we have seen. Of all the ultimate abilities that we have seen in outlooks. And Paradigm Shift allows you to choose one of several effects. You can, for example, heal allies in hit points and ego, a number of points. You could deal damage to all enemies, or you could reduce all charge times by 1 second. So you have several things that you can do. You need to choose the right paradigm shift for a particular situation during an encounter. So this outlook is definitely for the more dedicated or a bit more experienced player perhaps. Now let's talk of some of the abilities by level. You have the another one, interrupt ability. An ally adjacent to an enemy is allowed to use any attack they know, even if that attack is in recovery. You also have Damn Pride. You increase your ego by 3 depending on your level. Then you have Ally Support. Any bonuses or effects you give your allies are granted to you as well for the same duration. Then you have Defense Order. The target gains a bonus to endurance equal to your negotiation for a number of seconds. You also have Guard Order. The target doubles their endurance until the end of the second. You have a very cool action known as Cross Slash. You select an ally, and whenever an enemy moves between you two during a number of seconds, you trade places and inflict damage. That's also quite anime themed. When it comes to level 5, that is the most powerful abilities, you have things such as I Don't Think So. This is an interrupt. If an enemy activates an ability, you negate that ability. You also have Refuse Death. This is a spell. The target heals to full hit points and regenerates any lost limbs. They also heal any other injuries if the game master or narrator approves. You also have the Terrible. You stun an ally and perform any action without charging it first. And this could be handled in different ways, theme-wise. For example, maybe your character is a vampire and you suck the blood from an ally and the ally is stunned because of that, but you have extra power to carry out a new action. But what if your character is actually receiving help from an ally? Maybe the ally is like, use my power or my energy or whatever, and you take that energy and you do that action that you wanted to carry out. Next, we have the Trickster. The Trickster is quite balanced in terms of hit points and ego points. This is basically a wild card. This is somewhat of a jack of all trades, master of none, but it works more like someone who can fill the gap in any type of situation. If you needed someone to be like a frontliner, the Trickster could do that. or you want someone that attacks from a distance with spells, or if you want to support others with your abilities, the Trickster is also great for that. The unique ability of the Trickster is Hidden Ace. It allows a Trickster to learn an additional ability for every level, and not only that, this extra ability can be chosen from any outlook at or below the Trickster's current level. The Trickster is only able to use these extra abilities for a number of minutes at the cost of 1 meter. So to play effectively as a Trickster, you need to put extra effort in being a badass to get your meter up. And it also reminds me of some representations of, for example, Chaos Mage type of archetypes, in which you need to be familiar with all of the different abilities from all of the other outlooks, so you can use the right ability for the right situation. So the Trickster type of player will need to have this handbook close by, of course. Some of his ultimate abilities include Wildcard. You choose any damage type ultimate when you use this effect, and this ultimate uses the effects of the ultimate you choose. You also have Deus Ex Machina. The narrator or game master will summon an unlikely ally to help you out with the current situation. Afterwards, everyone chooses how much of a cop-out they feel that was between 1 and 10. 1 being foreshadowed, while 10 could be considered random. So you take a number of ego points multiplied by that scale. So this is a risky maneuver, but potentially a lifesaver. Now let's talk about some of the abilities per level. You have Copycat. This is an interrupt. You permanently sacrifice one ability, then learn the last ability used by the target enemy. You also have Dirty Tricks. Creatures you inflict with a status also take a number of ego points in damage. Then you have Backstab. You attack an enemy, this deals double damage if they can't see you, so the usual in fantasy games. You also have Dumb Luck, which allows you to reroll a die you just roll. And of course this has a recovery rate of seconds, you can't be using it all the time. You have some pretty strange and unusual abilities such as Altered Sight. You become permanently blind. And why would you want to do that to yourself? Well, you are able to determine everything around you in a radius equal to your level. So all of those invisible enemies and such, or enemies that burrow or face in and out or whatever, you will be able to detect them even above or below you, but beyond your range, you're blind. Then you have things such as Careful Study. This allows you to clash precision against a target, and if you succeed, you learn a passive that they know in exchange for one of your moves. You also have other things such as Lambast. This is a spell. The target takes a number of ego points in damage whenever they take ego damage from any other source. You also have some very powerful things such as I Don't Believe My Eyes. Creatures who are facing you lose any immunities that they have. You also have some very devastating attacks such as Assassinate. You must have line of sight to your target while charging this effect. Once this effect is charged, if you are adjacent to the unaware target, they take massive damage. Then we have the Armory chapter. Obtaining weapons and gear in this system is somewhat abstract. You basically have a reputation level. If the item that you want is of your same reputation, it's going to be quite easy to get. Maybe you can make it yourself. Maybe you know a friend that actually gives that item to you. But if the item that you want is a bit above your reputation level, maybe you can obtain it only at shops. That is, maybe you have to purchase it, of course, or trade it in some way. As that item goes up in level in comparison to your reputation level, you'll have to do a bit more elaborate things. Maybe something can only be obtained if you trade something quite valuable for it. Or maybe you actually need to take on a quest or mission to obtain that weapon or special gear. I think you should apply common sense to this, of course, depending on the situation, the setting, the current location in which the characters are at. So it's all about the narrator or game master making the right judgment calls. In this chapter you have information on combat inventory, that you can select a number of items in your inventory to keep in your belt or your holster or pocket, and you can use those right away in a fight, but the other ones will have to be kept in, for example, your backpack. You have information on different accessories, items, single-use items, specialized ammunition. And when it comes to accessories, they all have some sort of effect on you, like for example the halo. You roll an additional die when using a healing effect. Or maybe you have the shoulder devil. you roll an additional die when dealing fire damage. You also have, for example, the visor, which makes you immune to blind. You have the goatee, this is actually an accessory. You gain 1 stock of meter when you do something mean. You have things such as the tank top. You roll twice when using endurance and you take the best result. You also have the witch hat. You use your divination in place of endurance. There are many accessories and they are all of different levels. So for example, what I said about the halo, this is actually a level 1 accessory, quite easy to get. But if you want to use something like, for example, the angry eyes, in which you spend 1 stock of meter to add to your level as a bonus to a physical talent roll, this is actually a level 5 type of accessory. When it comes to items, you have things such as the shuriken. You inflict a number of damage points and you can throw 2 of them each second. You have other things like the eye drops that remove the blind status from adjacent targets at any time. You also have the memento. You restore ego damage for each of your levels or remove enraged status at any time. You also have the pie, which inflicts the target with ego damage and blind status. So this is perfect for the trickster outlook in my opinion. You also have bullets such as ice shot, shock shot, all of those inflicting a particular status effect related to that element like cold damage, electric damage. You also have bombs like flash bombs, smoke bombs. You also have gear like the light rod. You increase healing effects by 5 and you can spend a number of seconds to heal adjacent allies as well. You have gauntlets that increase your endurance. You also have umbrellas to negate the effects of rain if you're fighting in the rain, quite useful. You also have the Night Shield that increases your endurance when you block by a number of points, and this applies against all damage. Then we have the narration chapter. This is all about advice for the narration of the game. So here you're going to find information for beginning narrators, how to handle exploration, talents, how to figure out, for example, the threats, social interactions, how to handle combat, how to create goal-based encounters, details covering anything about the enemy's strength, ability lists, the weaknesses. You can basically create any creature that you can think of or that you have seen perhaps in works of fiction. You have broad categories, different powers and modifications that you can use to build your perfect adversary for a game, or perhaps ally. So for example, you have the category of monsters. This is any sort of creature that is quite powerful, quite fearsome, with a bonus to physical talents, but with a penalty on all other talents. So they're going to have things like extra arms or large wings. They could have hurricane forces. That is, when you reduce a creature to 0 hit points, you can make another attack. It's sort of like a cliff type of maneuver. You also have things such as mighty pull. You clash strength against the target enemy, in this case the player characters probably. And if successful, you pull them a number of spaces towards you to better pound them with your fists or claws, or slash them with your claws or whatever. And you also have powerful eyes that are able to see details at a much larger distance. You have other things such as savage charge, searing force, shock and awe, things like that, and tough claws of course. You have the humanoid category. This is quite balanced, but because of that you can also modify them in different ways to represent any sort of thing. If you want like an weird alien species or something, you could use humanoids as long as they have that humanoid characteristic. But if you wanted some standard fantasy characters such as elves, perhaps even hobgoblins, you could use this humanoid category to shape your character to look like that particular fantasy species. You have some passive things such as brain dead. The user is able to take no actions on their own. They are immune to all statuses because of this. So this is perfect for perhaps zombies that aren't exactly undead. It's all up to you. Or maybe they have the passive ability of belt fed. They do not need to reload bows or guns. I think this is perfect for a character that is carrying a minigun type of weapon, and they have this like a string of bullets being fed directly from the belt or a pack perhaps. You also have a master plan. The enemies you inflict with ego damage gain frozen. So this is great if you want to challenge those player characters that have low tolerance when it comes to ego damage. You also have humanoid actions such as aimbot. For 1 minute, all of your rolls automatically result in 12, but you may not roll again. You also have things such as burn everything. You attack a creature within 2 to 6 spaces, and if successful, you inflict divination damage as fire damage. So this is great for pyromancer type of enemies. You also have other things like pressure points. If you want to have like a ninja or monk, you negate an action or attack a creature is attempting unless they lose 10 hit points. Then you have the spirits category. This is perfect for somewhat ethereal or intangible foes. They are mischievous and they have a penalty to physical talents, but they get a bonus to all other talents. They have some things such as absorb element. The spirit chooses an element, and when that spirit is dealt damage of that element, they heal for the same amount instead. They also have from behind the black. If no one is looking at you, you may turn invisible for 1 minute per level. Spirits have also a very interesting thing known as Wheel of Fate. At the beginning of each minute, you roll a d12 and you gain effects from the following table depending on what you rolled. And if you roll a 12, you may gain multiple effects. So you have things such as all the spirits' allies gain a bonus on all rolls. Or maybe the head swells and the ego doubles. Or maybe all of your costs are doubled. So some results could actually be a disadvantage. It's somewhat of a risk for the spirit to have this passive ability of Wheel of Fate. They have some spells such as a knife through butter. The target's weapons ignore endurance for 1 minute per level, and objects take double damage from these attacks. You also have the spell Intangible. The target is able to pass through walls and objects for 1 minute per level. Maybe the characters need to negotiate with a spirit so that this spirit uses this spell on the player characters and they are able to get into some places that were too securely guarded or inside some vault that they could not penetrate. You also have some actions such as Fog of War. The weather changes to fog for 1 minute. You also have Heat of Battle. The weather changes to heat for 1 minute. While this effect is active, you may spend an action with a 2-second charge to target a space, and any creature in that space takes a number of points in fire damage. You also have the Witching Hour. You can only use this effect once per day, and for the next hour, all spells cast roll twice and take the preferred result. Any creature who attempts to use logic for any reason rolls twice and takes the worst result. So as you can see, this spirit type of NPCs have a lot to do with affecting weather and magic. Then we have the visitors category. This is kind of like outsiders in other games. These are all about eldritch and strange creatures. They have passive things such as All Death's Final. Any creature killed by you is unable to be resurrected by any means. You also have casual dialogue. You may use a social attack and a physical attack in the same second. You have some actions such as Annihilation Limbo. The entire stage is transported to an empty void. All creatures not native to this void take damage at the start of each turn, and if the user falls unconscious, this effect ends. You have some interesting things such as Momentary Rapture. For 1 minute, no creature on stage is able to take damage. You also have Rallying Cry. All allies gain a bonus to attack rolls for every enemy adjacent to them for 1 minute. So what do I think of So You Wanna Be a Badass? I think this is one of the more unique role-playing games that I have seen. I like how they gave so much importance to social combat. I think it focuses a lot on being fun, and the emphasis put on being a badass also makes it stand out quite a bit. I think it's semi-universal because even though you can play it using any setting, any world, anything that you want, almost any theme, you're always going to have that social combat element and that badass meter, and the way the talents are handled, the fast-paced combat with everyone acting at once in a single second, that is quite unique of this game, and because of that I think this system works great with anime, manga and video game type of settings. Lots of over-the-top situations, especially with those abilities of the outlooks in which you are able to jump at a great height. It reminded me of the Dragoon in Final Fantasy. All of those special powers and abilities that involve modifying reality. For example, I didn't mention that the Trickster has a way in which he basically erases parts of reality for a little bit and the characters phase in and out from existence. So you have all of those things. I like it that the different abilities and powers remain, how would you say, adaptable enough so that you can tweak them or modify them aesthetically or use some trappings to represent them in any way that you like. So a power being used in a narrator's setting is going to be considerably different in how it looks and how it sounds within the fiction when compared to that same power in another narrator's setting. It could be an elemental wall of ice. An attack could be handled as some sort of storm of diamond dust, or perhaps a rain of bullets, or a meteor shower, anything that you can think of. And that's why I say it's semi-universal, because in that way you can adapt it to anything. But when it comes to, because of the social aspect and the badass meter, that is always going to be present. I would recommend or advise against removing that. This is part of what makes the game special. So if you want to have like Final Fantasy or Phantasy Star Online with this system, you could do that, but you're going to have that social attack element that is otherwise not present in Final Fantasy or Phantasy Star Online. I think the badass meter element is going to keep everyone at the table involved and engaged as they try to do everything in a really cool and stylish way. And when it comes to combat, they're always trying to fight almost impossible odds, but also in a smart and effective way, using their talents and abilities. My only criticism of the entire book is that what I mentioned at the beginning when it comes to the quality, that some parts I think could be better highlighted, and the definition of the lines in some of the illustrations could have been better. But I highly recommend So You Wanna Be a Badass if you're looking for a unique role-playing game system that is quite adaptable to any setting, any game world, as long as you don't mind adding those social and badass elements to a specific setting or game world. And as a last thing of note, perhaps adding a list of specialized vehicles and some vehicular combat rules could have enhanced or boosted the possibilities of So You Wanna Be a Badass. Of course, not all of the adventures that you're going to play are going to feature vehicular combat and exploration using some sort of transportation, but I think it would have been a good addition nonetheless. If you think you have seen it all in role-playing games and you're looking for something fun and unusual, definitely get So You Wanna Be a Badass. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.